Ok, bonjour à tous. Donc, bienvenue dans cette nouvelle session des séminaires quantiques de l'ONERA à distance. Donc, on est très heureux aujourd'hui d'accueillir Hugo Defienne de l'Université de Glasgow. Donc, Hugo, tu as fait ta thèse, tu m'arrêtes si je dis des bêtises, sous la direction de Sylvain Gigant au LKB de 2013 à 2016, je crois, où tu as travaillé donc sur des états quantiques de la lumière dans des milieux désordonnés. Ensuite, tu es parti donc faire un premier postdoc dans le groupe de Jason Fleischer à Princeton, où tu as travaillé donc, c'est un groupe qui s'appelle de l'imagerie quantique, et tu as travaillé sur un certain nombre de techniques d'imagerie quantique avec de la structuration spatiale de la phase d'état intriqué. Je pense que tu vas nous expliquer ça un peu plus précisément. Et puis donc en 2019, tu as été lauréat d'une bourse Marie Curie de l'Union européenne qui t'a permis donc de rejoindre l'université de Glasgow, où tu travailles toujours sur des protocoles de communication quantique avec des états intriqués de la lumière, et où tu as également un poste de lecturer. Je sais pas quel est le terme exact pour traduire ça en français. Et donc, on est très heureux de t'accueillir aujourd'hui. Il y a beaucoup de gens à l'ONERA qui sont intéressés par ces idées d'imagerie avec des états quantiques de la lumière. Donc, on est impatient d'apprendre ce que tu as à nous dire là-dessus. Et voilà. Donc, merci d'avoir accepté l'invitation et je te laisse la parole.
Merci beaucoup pour cette introduction, Sylvain, et bonjour, bonjour tout le monde. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité à ce séminaire. Alors, d'abord, une première chose, si ça ne dérange personne, je vais faire la présentation en anglais, parce que je suis plus à l'aise de parler de mon sujet si je parle en anglais, et je pense qu'il y a certaines personnes dans ceux qui écoutent qui aussi ne parlent moins bien français que d'autres. So I will just turn into English, if that's okay for everyone. So, as Sylvain was saying, my name is Hugo Defienne. I am a lecturer at the University of Glasgow. And today I'm going to talk about quantum control in disordered media. And I'm going to explain you how this approach can be used as a tool for advancing quantum optical technologies. Since I believe that most of you are familiar with quantum technology and quantum optical technologies, I would like to start this presentation by giving you a brief introduction about disordered media and also what are the technique to, what I mean when I talk about the technique to manipulate and control light through a disordered media. So let's start with an introduction on that. A disordered medium is a disordered medium is an optical medium in which the refractive index varies randomly in space and time in a very complex way. And for example, if these variations are smooth and small in amplitude, a disordered medium is effectively creating optical aberration. As we can see here, this is typically the case where you have an air that is turbulent due to a variation of temperature, and you create this optical aberration. If the fluctuations of refractive index are a bit more stronger in amplitude, a bit more complex, then the medium effectively scatters light in many directions. And in this case, this is exactly, for example, what happens when light propagates through a cloud. Light gets scattered by all the small droplets of water in many directions, and you cannot actually see through a cloud because of scattering. Of course, there are many different types of scattering media with different properties, with different structure and complexity of their refractive index. And some examples are, for example, the ground glass window or a layer of paint. Some other examples that we find in many experiments are, for example, a multimode fiber. A multimode fiber, effectively, when light propagates through a multimode fiber, it gets scrambled during the propagation due to a strong light mixing process. Another example is a biological tissue that, of course, scatters light and hinder many imaging applications. So, as you can imagine, most optical application, a disordered medium, in particular in imaging and communication, a disordered medium is considered as a drawback for optical application. And just to give you an example, when you have atmospheric turbulence and you try to image a star, of course, because of the atmospheric turbulence, you get a distorted image of the star. Same if you want to transmit an image through a multimode fiber, you cannot do that properly because the light gets mixed during propagation. in biological tissue. Scattering in biological tissue is a big problem when you try to do biomedical imaging and you try to image either focus or image deep inside a biological specimen. So here we see that in most situations, scattering or optical aberrations are definitely a drawback in optical applications. To overcome these problems, researchers over the last 50 years have developed many techniques in order to compensate, to mitigate the effect of optical aberration and scattering. As you probably know, the first technique that were developed were adaptive optics. They were used in astronomy, using deformable mirror. Researchers were able to compensate for the aberration created by the atmosphere and essentially retrieve a clean image of the star or the sky that they were imaging. Then a bit later, so in the last 15, 20 years, adaptive optics has resurfaced under the form of wavefront shaping thanks to the development of spatial light modulator. These devices were essentially used to combat much stronger fluctuation of refractive index, so much like scattering and not only optical aberration. And they were used, for example, to transmit an image through the multimode fiber, as it is done here, or, for example, to help to focus or to image deep inside biological specimen. Just to give you a bit more concrete example about the importance of these methods of wavefront shaping using spatial light modulator, I'm just going to give you a couple of more examples only with classical light, how is that it has been used. And there is first a very important work that has been implemented in 2007 by the group of Alan Most, where they demonstrated how you can actually refocus laser light through a thick layer of paint. When you just send a laser through a layer of paint, what you observe is this figure here is just a speckle pattern. And when you shape the wave that is illuminating the layer of paint, you shape it in a very specific way. You can effectively refocus the light through the scattering medium on a specific position. This work was really one of the pioneering work of wavefront shaping through scattering through disordered media, and it triggered a lot of many other approaches, many other techniques in order to essentially compensate the effect of scattering. And for example, some techniques that were developed, some other techniques were developed, such as those based on the transmission matrix of the scattering medium. For example, to do imaging, this is only one example of it. And you can essentially use this wavefront shaping to perform imaging through a scattering medium. Here is the image with the compensation, and here is the image without the compensation. So in these cases, effectively, wavefront shaping were used to compensate, to overcome the effect of scattering. And as I told you also, they have been used to control, to manipulate the light propagation also in multimode fibers. And in a similar way, they have been used, for example, to transmit specific spatial mode in a multimode fiber. So here you have an example of a recent work where essentially when you want to send a certain type of spatial mode, a Hermite-Gaussian mode, through the multimode fiber, you see that if you do not do anything, you get a speckle pattern at the output. But if you use the compensation technique, wavefront shaping, you can effectively retrieve the mode quite well at the output of the fiber. So this is also good. This has some potential for improving at least communication with spatial mode in multimode fiber. A last example that I would like to mention is that sometimes these wavefront shaping are not only dedicated to overcome the problem of scattering, but sometimes they also exploit it. And in this case, it has been demonstrated that it's possible to exploit the complex mixing process occurring in a multimode fiber using wavefront shaping to implement some reconfigurable linear operators that can be used, for example, to do some simple optical processing task. So here I have shown you like very small amount of the work that have been done is in this very active domain of adaptive optics and more generally wavefront shaping in disordered media. But the main message I want to convey here is the fact that light shaping technique in disordered media is a very powerful tool to improve and develop optical technologies, and in particular optical technologies in the domain of imaging, communication, and computing. So this is really the first message from this introduction. But from a more general point of view, we all know that there are many other research fields in optics that aim to also improve optical technology. And in this respect, the field of quantum optics, which is at first very disconnected from light shaping in disordered media, the field of quantum optics has been very successful in doing that over the last 20 years as well. Indeed, as you know, quantum optics was first used really as a platform to test the foundations of quantum mechanics. But then it gradually became a field that can lead to new applications by exploiting the quantum properties of light. And for example, there have been recently many applications developed by using quantum properties of light in the domain of communication, for example. As you probably know, people have developed a quantum key distribution protocol or quantum communication protocol to establish secure communication between two parties. It has been also important for developing application in computing, for example, by trying to achieve some computing task with photons that are very hard to do with a classical computer. And also in the domain of imaging and sensing, either to improve, let's say, classical imaging technique, to improve the performance of already existing imaging technique, or to develop actually new imaging modalities. So in this presentation, what I will show you how we can bridge a gap between these two very apparently disconnected domains of optics. One is the domain of light shaping in disordered media, and the other one is the domain of quantum optics, and in particular quantum optics for developing new applications. And in this presentation, the question I would like to answer, at least partially answer, is how can these technologies based on the quantum properties of light can benefit from the technique of light shaping, and in particular from the technique of light shaping used in the context of disordered media. This presentation, to answer this question, my presentation will be divided in 3 parts. In each part, I will describe an example of an application in which we combine light shaping in disordered media and quantum optics. In the first part of my presentation, the first application is an application in quantum communication. I will show you how we can use light shaping in multimode fiber to enable quantum communication quantum communication through multimode fiber. So that's the first part. The second part of my talk, we will still use multimode fiber as the disorder system, but in this case, I will show you how we can use light shaping in disordered media in order to turn a multimode fiber into a programmable linear network, in a sense, into a small quantum lab. In the last part of my presentation, if I have time to do it, I will show you, in this case, how we can adapt adaptive optics and wavefront shaping techniques to quantum imaging schemes. And in particular, how we can use this technique to do quantum imaging in scattering media, and what's the interest of doing that. So before I keep going this presentation, I think it's important here to mention that, so as you can see, these 3, from a quantum point of view, these 3 different parts of my presentation, these 3 applications are relatively disconnected with each other. However, it's important to keep in mind that they have something in common in the fact that they all rely on wavefront shaping to be implemented and to be operated. So in this presentation, instead of focusing on the advantages, the real advantages, the quantum advantages that this technique provide, I will really try to focus my attention on the role play by light shaping in these approaches, and especially what are the advantages that are provided by using light shaping in these different quantum protocols. And of course, I will be, please feel free also to interrupt me anytime if you have a question during the presentation. I will be very happy to answer them on the fly. I cannot see your windows, so you will have to just just speak and ask the question.
We're still here, don't worry.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I will just first start with so the first application in which we use light shaping and light shaping in disorder media and quantum optics in the domain of quantum communication in this case. So as in most quantum communication protocols or problem, there is always Alice who wants to send a message to the receiver Bob. And to send this message in a secure way, the best way to do it is actually for them to share a secret key. There are many different ways of establishing a secret key between Alice and Bob, and using a quantum key distribution protocol is one of them. And in this case, we're going to focus on a very specific quantum key distribution protocol that is called a Neckert protocol. In a Neckert protocol, essentially you have pairs of entangled photons, and each photon of a pair is sent towards, one is sent towards Alice, the other is sent towards Bob, and they perform measurement on these photons, and then by comparing their measurement, they can effectively establish a secret key between them. So this is the protocol we're going to consider, and in addition to that, we are also going to consider a specific type of entangled photons, in this case, which are going to be entangled photons in space, high-dimensional spatial entanglement, which in practice means that instead of performing measurement on the polarization degrees of freedom of the photons, we're going to perform measurements between the spatial modes of the photons. This type of protocol based on spatial entanglement are quite recent, and they provide, it has been demonstrated that they provide some higher information capacity in the QKD protocol, and also it has also been demonstrated that they are more robust to noise. However, since they are using spatial degrees of freedom, they are also much more sensitive to propagation than the case of polarization. And just to give you a very realistic example of that, if you try to implement this experiment across a city, for example, you send one of the photons to Alice, and the other you try to send it to Bob. But during the propagation, the photon experiences diffraction, scattering, and effectively at the end you have so many losses that it's very difficult for Bob to detect the photon and for the two, for Alice and Bob to establish a key. One solution that has been proposed to do that is essentially to replace the free space lead by a multimode fiber. Indeed, the multimode fiber, if it's not too long, if it's typically a couple of kilometers, it has less losses than what is going to give you free space propagation. And in particular, it can support many modes, which means that we can still have this high dimensionality of spatial entanglement that we need in our protocol. So it's great. However, the problem with multimode fiber is the problem of light mixing. When you send a spatial mode into a multimode fiber, it gets scrambled and gets mixed between all the modes of the fiber. So at the end, Bob will not know actually what spatial mode Alice has sent at the beginning. So it's a problem. To overcome this problem, the challenge was actually to use light shaping technique, use a technique that has been developed with classical light, adapt them to this problem, and to transport high-dimensional spatial entanglement through a multimode fiber with the perspective of establishing a QKD protocol. One essential step when you want to establish a QKD protocol with spatial entanglement is first to certify entanglement between the two parties. So in this work here, we're going to just restrict ourselves to the entanglement certification step. So we won't actually implement exactly the QKD protocol, but this step is necessary if someone wants later to implement a QKD protocol. So here we're going to just focus on certifying entanglements between Alice and Bob. And at first, I will actually consider the case where there is no multimode fiber. So Alice and Bob are essentially in the same room, and we have the photon pair source that is here on the left. In this case, photon pairs are produced by spontaneous parametric bond conversion in a PPKTP crystal that you can see here by illuminating the crystal with a blue pump laser. Then after we filter out the blue, and the two photons are generated by type 2 SPDC, which means that you can separate it in space using a polarizing beam splitter. One photon is sent towards Alice, and the other photon is sent toward Bob. What is important to notice here is the fact that the light that is emitted at the output is very multimode, which means that if you look, for example, in the plane, here in the plane of Alice, spatial plane of Alice, you see this homogeneous structure, and that is effectively composed of many spatial modes. And to perform her measurement, Alice will essentially divide the space into some pixels. In fact, she will divide it in 7 pixels. And that will form what we're going to call the pixel basis. And to measure one spatial mode in this pixel basis is going to be very easy. She's going to use a combination of a spatial light modulator and a single pixel photodetector. And she will just program a very small tilt on the spatial light modulator to direct the light from this very specific region towards the photodetector. So in this case, she's only measuring this mode in the middle. And Bob does exactly the same. And by doing that, they can effectively measure photons, so in all the 7 modes of this pixel basis. Not only they detect the photon, but they will also measure coincidence between them. So essentially try to measure correlation between their measurements. And when they do that for all the different combination of modes that they can implement, they can achieve the first step of the certification of entanglement process, which is measuring the correlation matrix, the matrix of coincidence, if you want, in the pixel basis. And if we look at this measurement, we observe that there is a strong correlation over the diagonal, while the off-diagonal coefficients are relatively low, which effectively highlight that the photon pairs that you are generated here with this source are strongly correlated in space. Measuring correlation is the first step of the certification process, but that's not enough. If we want to certify the presence of entanglement, we need to perform correlation measurements, so coincidence measurement in at least 2 different bases. And to do that, we essentially need to perform a change of basis and do again this measurement, but not using a pixel basis, using another basis, and to construct this basis, which is going to be a mutually unbiased basis, just another basis of the space. We can construct this basis using a method from the measurement that were performed in the pixel basis. Each vector of this new basis that we're going to call the TIL basis is essentially a linear combination of the vector of the pixel basis. And we can do again the same measurement in this TIL basis. So by scanning all the vectors of this TIL basis to retrieve a coincidence matrix in this case. And with these 2 information, these 2 coincidence matrix that both have strong correlation over the diagonal, we can simply use a formula to calculate a fidelity criteria that essentially will tell us if if we have a certification of spatial entanglement, and actually spatial entanglement is in a certain number of dimensions. So in this case, with a fidelity of 94%, we can certify the presence of entanglement between Alice and Bob in up to 7 dimensions. And again, this is an essential step. So before to implement any QKD protocol with this type of source, you need first to make sure that Alice and Bob can certify entanglement in a certain number of dimensions. Actually, the number of dimensions will give you an idea of how much information capacity you will be able to use when you will implement the QKD protocol.
Could you re-explain what the tilt basis is exactly, and what would you get with it if you had only classical correlations instead of quantum?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the question. So the first basis. So the TIL basis is just another basis of the space. So the first basis that we have seen is just the pixel basis. So each mode is essentially just a pointy space, so macro pixel. The TIL basis is just another basis that is constructed to be mutually unbiased with the pixel basis. So mutually unbiased basis, it's purely mathematical criteria. It's not exactly like that, but it's a bit like when you have 2 orthogonal bases. Okay, you can always construct a basis that's orthogonal to the other. In this case, you construct a basis that is mutually unbiased compared to the pixel basis. That's the TIL basis. And when you do this calculation, I mean, it's literally a calculation that you do in your computer. You compute each mode of the new basis tilt by linear combination of this. And when because you have entanglement between your photon pairs, you can also observe correlation in the TIL basis and in the pixel basis. If you look at classical correlation, the difference between entanglement and classical correlation is that entanglement will give you correlation in many different mutually unbiased bases, while classical correlation will only give you correlation in a single basis, but not necessarily in another basis. And that's why we use this criteria of measuring correlation in different mutually unbiased bases to certify the fact that we have entanglement and not only classical correlation.
Ok, merci. J'ai Laurent qui demande dans le chat, est-ce que c'est champ proche et champ lointain, la pixel et la tilt basis?
Alors, c'est... donc, alors, alors, ça dépend de comment on va définir champ proche et champ lointain dans ce cas-là. Mais je pense que la question qu'il voulait demander, c'est est-ce que la tilt basis, est-ce que c'est effectivement la base de Fourier construite à partir de la base des pixels?
Laurent, tu peux prendre la parole hein, si tu veux.
Oui, pardon, j'essaie juste de faire le lien entre pixels. Donc, on a compris que le pixel, c'est tu prends des bouts de l'image en champ proche, visiblement. Et j'imaginais que peut-être que le tilt, ça pouvait être lié au champ lointain, c'est-à-dire à la transformée de Fourier, effectivement, du champ proche.
Oui, alors effectivement, c'est pas loin de ça, mais donc généralement, ce qu'on trouve, c'est que quand on calcule la tilt basis, on la calcule, et effectivement, elle ressemble beaucoup à la transformée de Fourier, à la base de Fourier qui est construite sur la base des pixels. Donc oui, elle y ressemble beaucoup, mais c'est pas exactement ça. Elle est légèrement, en fait, les coefficients, ça va être une base de Fourier un petit peu transformée, les coefficients vont être légèrement, il va y avoir des poids différents sur les coefficients de la construction des pixels. Mais effectivement, on n'est pas loin. On pourrait notamment, en fait, on pourrait utiliser la base de pixels et directement la base de Fourier comme deux mutually unbiased bases, parce que c'est deux bases qu'on connaît, on pourrait les construire sans utiliser cette technique, mais l'avantage d'utiliser ce qu'on appelle la tilt basis, c'est que ça nous permet de nous placer vraiment dans une base mutually unbiased qui est optimale pour faire notre mesure. Si on fait la base de Fourier, par exemple, je vais peut-être avoir aussi des corrélations ici, mais je vais peut-être avoir des corrélations qui sont un peu moins bonnes et qui vont me donner un critère de fidélité un peu moins élevé. L'avantage de construire ici notre base, c'est qu'on on adapte notre mesure pour être dans des conditions optimales pour avoir la meilleure fidélité possible.
Ok, merci.
So in this case, so I was saying that since we can get correlation into a mutually unbiased basis, this is enough for ensuring a certain level of fidelity, which provide us the fact that we can certify entanglement in a certain number of dimensions. Great. So, but that's not really the problem we want to tackle here. The real problem that we want to tackle is the fact that what happens when we go into a realistic situation and we put a multimode fiber in our problem. So now one photon is sent towards Alice and the other photon is sent toward Bob, but after propagating through a multimode fiber. And if you do again the measurement in the pixel and in the tilt basis exactly the same way we did it before, we take the same basis, we observe that in this case we do not observe anymore the strong correlation between the spatial mode in these two bases. And in fact, if you use these values, so this data to compute your fidelity criteria, you cannot achieve any certification in this case, so you don't have enough fidelity to do that. So Alice and Bob, in the presence of the multimode fiber, cannot certify the presence of entanglement between them, and therefore cannot go forward and potentially implement a QKD protocol. So this doesn't work, and we know the reason for that, because we know that when light propagates through a multimode fiber, the different modes, the different spatial modes get actually mixed, and the light that Bob gets at the output is very different from the spatial structure of the light that Bob measures at the output, is very different from the spatial structure of the light that is at the input of the fiber. And in fact, this has been very well studied with classical light. And here I'm going to come a bit on the same aspect of light mixing the multimode fiber with classical light. When you inject a laser into a multimode fiber to just focus the light at the input of the fiber, what you observe at the output is a speckle pattern. That essentially is a signature of the light mixing process that is happening in the fiber. As I was telling you at the beginning, there were many techniques have been developed in order to overcome this effect of scattering, and one of them is the transmission matrix technique. In the transmission matrix technique, there are two steps. In the first step of the process, you want to characterize the transmission matrix of the fiber. And to do that, we're going to use a spatial light modulator. Characterizing the transmission matrix of the fiber is essentially characterizing the light mixing process occurring between the spatial mode in the fiber, between actually the input spatial mode and the output spatial mode. The matrix takes the form of a complex matrix like that, linking all the input spatial mode of the fiber to the output mode. To measure it, essentially what you do, you just scan the mode at the input and measure the corresponding output speckle pattern in phase and amplitude, and each speckle pattern essentially represents a column of your transmission matrix. So in practice, it's exactly measured like that. You scan the mode at the input and you measure the field at the output, and this enables you to reconstruct classically the transmission matrix. Once you know this transmission matrix, you can use it, you can use the knowledge of the matrix, you can inverse it in order to program the spatial light modulator to achieve a desired field at the output. For example, you can inverse the matrix, or calculate the inverse, multiply by the desired output. So in this case, for example, I want to refocus all the light into a specific mode. Then I program the spatial light modulator. I can refocus the light on one specific pixel at the output. So as we can see here, we know how to control, to manipulate classical light through a multimode fiber and actually unscramble the light that is propagating through it. But as I was saying before, in our system, we don't have any laser. We just have photon pairs propagating through the multimode fiber. And that does not give you, apparently, we don't have any knowledge of the transmission matrix of the system. Well, in fact, if we look a bit more closely of what we just did when we send the photon pairs and measure this coincidence through the multimode fiber, we can observe that essentially the pixel bases that we measured here exactly represent the coincidence, so the correlation between a spatial mode of Alice and a spatial mode of Bob. But if you think about it, the spatial mode of Alice are exactly the spatial mode that are at the input of the multimode fiber, which means that these correlation coefficients here are exactly the coefficient that link an input spatial mode of the multimode fiber to an output spatial mode of the fiber. And in fact, you can verify, you can observe that these measurements in coincidence performed in the pixel bases are exactly the transmission matrix of your system. In fact, it's not exactly the transmission matrix, it's only the amplitude part of the transmission matrix of your system. Just get the phase, we just implement a phase shifting interferometric process, and we can also get the phase, and at the end, we have the full knowledge of the transmission matrix. So here, it's interesting to notice that we didn't use any classical light to measure the transmission matrix of the system, but by just performing the measurement with photon pairs in the coincidence basis, even if we don't have strong correlation, by just doing this measurement, we can effectively learn the transmission matrix of the multimode fiber. Once we know the transmission matrix of the multimode fiber, what has been shown with classical light is that we can then use it to unscramble the light propagating through it. And this is exactly what we do. We calculate the inverse of this transmission matrix. And using this inverse, we perform a change of bases on the SLM on the Alice side, which means that Alice now is not going to measure anymore, perform spatial measurement in the pixel basis, but she's going to do it in a new basis that has been calculated using the inverse of the transmission matrix. And this basis is called the unscrambled pixel basis. And when she does that, and Bob keeps using the pixel basis, in this new basis, we observe that, again, we can measure a coincidence matrix in which we have strong correlation between photon pairs, between the spatial mode of photon pairs. Again, as I was saying at the beginning, correlation in one basis is not enough, so we need to go into another basis to perform some other correlation. We do exactly the same. We perform a change of basis again, and we essentially perform another measurement in a new basis that is called the unscrambled tilt basis, in this case, that is mutually unbiased with the unscrambled pixel basis. And we observe again strong correlation between the spatial mode of the photon in this basis. And from this measurement of correlation, we effectively demonstrated that we have enough fidelity to certify the presence of entanglement in at least 6 dimensions in this case. Note that because the shaping process is not perfect, this is why we cannot achieve the same fidelity than without the multimode fiber, because it's not ideal the way we perform the change of basis. So here, by using this technique, we essentially demonstrated it's possible to certify entanglement between Alice and Bob through a multimode fiber. That again is an essential step when if someone wants to implement a QKD protocol afterward. But I was saying, sorry, no. But as I was saying at the beginning, one thing I really want to focus on is the role of the wavefront shaping technique in this case. And something you have probably noticed in this experiment is the fact that the difference between the classical and the quantum case in this experiment is the fact that if you want to perform wavefront shaping in a fiber with classical light, you effectively shape the light that gets injected into the multimode fiber to control it and refocus it at the output, for example. But in the quantum case, what is interesting is that you have probably noticed that we only shape the photon that is not propagating through the multimode fiber, which means that the photon that is propagating through the multimode fiber sending towards Bob has never been shaped by a spatial light modulator. And Bob is always performing the measurement exactly in the same basis. So this is actually interesting because we do not shape the light through the multimode fiber, but we still are able to retrieve correlation between photons, and actually we are still able to certify entanglement. And the reason for that is actually interesting, is the fact that the way we certify entanglement is based on measuring correlation between spatial modes. And just to illustrate this way, essentially, if you have Alice and Bob that measure something, you can see that as two smiley image, for example. When they detect the similar image on each side, you can ensure that the certification is okay. When the images are different, there is no certification. So it's essentially what they are doing. When you put a multimode fiber, essentially the image of Bob is getting scrambled, and in this case, you cannot certify anymore. The entanglement between Alice and Bob. But what we do in our experiment, we effectively scramble the side of Alice in order to have exactly the same scramble pattern at the output. And because this pattern, even if they do not mean anything by themselves, they are correlated again because the scramble is exactly the same in this case. And then we can effectively retrieve and achieve certification by essentially comparing scrambled photons that have been scrambled exactly the same way on each side, which is different of the classical technique, where it is what is done is they try to unscramble this part of the light.
And why not do the other way around?
We can also do it the other way around. There is no real problem of doing it the other way around. It will work exactly the same. I don't know any, to be honest, I do not see any advantage or disadvantage of doing it on the Bob side rather than on Alice side. But it's just a curiosity in this case that it's a curiosity that effectively you do not shape the light that is propagating through the fiber.
So I somehow understand that you emulate the behavior of the multimode fiber by a SLM, by a local SLM.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But a single plane SLM cannot completely emulate what's happening in multimode fiber because there is phase and amplitudes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, go. Yeah. Sorry, go for it. Finish the question. Sorry.
So yeah, well, the question is how can you emulate the multimode fiber with a single SLM?
Yeah, so you cannot. It's true. So we do not emulate the full multimode fiber with a single SLM. We just do it mode by mode. So effectively, what we do, again, the measurement that is performed by Alice and Bob, here, if I come back, it's a scanning measurement. So when Alice effectively measure the mode at the output, you only do it pixel by pixel, which means that what you effectively do, you use the SLM to compensate only one specific mode at a time, which is another way of saying that you have effectively calculated all the vectors of the light. But in this situation, if you put a camera at the output, you won't see simultaneously in parallel all the mode getting redirected into the right position. So it's a mode by mode approach because we measure at the output successively the modes. Alice measure only the modes successively, one after the other. It's exactly like if you take the classical case, it's exactly like if you were calculating many focusing patterns that focus at different positions at the output, and you apply them successively, and which is what Alice is doing when she's performing the measurement with Bob at the output. But yeah, I agree with you. A single SLM pattern cannot reproduce exactly the disorder. Just reproduce column by column the disorder.
Okay, thanks.
And how? Sorry,
Yeah,
one more. How stable is this unscrambling matrix in practice, or how stable does a multimode fiber has to be for this protocol to work?
So it has to be very stable. So the multimode fiber should not move during the process. Essentially, every time the fiber moves, you need to measure again the transmission matrix. So that's yeah. So that's exactly that. So ideally, if in the experiment we did, the fiber was essentially laying on an optical table, so it was relatively stable, but it can be also sensitive to temperature fluctuation that can also change the transmission matrix. Any change in the fiber in the medium, you need to remeasure the transmission matrix and do the process again.
But that's doable in principle in a
well,
protocol, right?
Yeah, it's definitely doable in principle. The question is going to be how long time it takes to measure the transmission matrix. The problem is that with the way the experiment, so since we measure the transmission matrix by measuring coincidence between the modes at the output, in the current experiment, it's actually quite long to do that because you need to have essentially enough count to build a good matrix with a good enough SNR to be useful. So it takes a couple of hours. And but if you see that but there is no problem in principle of improving this part. It's just a technological improvement, and then you will need to measure quickly the transmission matrix, at least faster than the time of variation of the medium, to be able to use it, and remeasure it actually every time there is a movement. So it's not an easy thing to do, but there are some people trying to do that with classical light first. And it's not, let's say, the quantum, the fact that we measure coincidence at the output practically it takes a long time, so it's not ideal if the medium is moving.
And how will if you change the size of the fiber, so the number of modes of the fiber, how will it change the setup?
Sorry, how will it change the setup? That's what you ask?
Yes, because you're talking about stability. Probably if you have fewer modes, it will be more stable.
Yes, so I mean there are yes, probably. So it will be, let's say that if you have more modes in your fiber, effectively it will be more sensitive to any perturbation. But I mean the critical point in terms of stability for the fiber is not really the number of modes; it's more the length of the fiber. So the longer is the fiber, the more sensitive it will be to temperature fluctuation and vibration, and this will be these are really the big problem. But I think I agree with you that if the less modes you have, the less sensitive the transmission matrix will be to external perturbation. In this case, the fiber was 400 modes.
Okay, that's a lot.
So, what I would like you to remember from this first part of the presentation. So I have shown you an example where we can use effectively a transmission matrix-based wavefront shaping technique to at least certify entanglement through multimode fiber. We achieved the certification of high dimension entanglement in up to 6 dimensions. And from the light shaping point of view, we have also the word non-local here is not the word non-local in the quantum sense, it's just the word non-local in the sense that it's Alice that is performing the shaping on the light that is not going through the multimode fiber. So it's a non-local, classical non-local transmission matrix-based wavefront shaping technique. But again, as Sylvain was mentioning, there's no reason why we cannot do also apply the transmission matrix on Bob's side. And so this was an example of using light shaping in the context of quantum communication in a multimode fiber. And this also was the first example of my talk. And now I'm going to go to present you the second example that is also involving multimode fiber. But in this case, we're going to use this transmission matrix-based wavefront shaping technique not to overcome or to compensate the effect of scattering of light mixing in the fiber, but rather to actually exploit the light mixing process to implement some linear network in the multimode fiber. And so again, this part is slightly different than the first one because it's not the same goal at the end. But again, the link here is really the fact that we're going to use light shaping again. So in this context, we move really from the topic of quantum communication to a topic that is more close to quantum computing, and we're going to talk about linear optical network. So in quantum optics, linear optical network can be used typically to perform a linear operation between a certain input mode to transform it into a certain output mode. These linear optical operations are typically performed using this photonic chip design, where you have a couple of inputs here, a couple of waveguides that are all connected with each other. You inject the photons that compose your state at the input into these waveguides, and it performs a certain operation, and you detect the photon at the outputs of the waveguide, like here, by performing coincidence, typically between the different output ports. These linear optical circuits have been used to implement, for example, some quantum computing tasks. It was the case for the first implementation of boson sampling experiment, for example, which is one of the few tasks that is difficult to perform with a classical computer. And they can also be used to simulate quantum systems, for example, to simulate the Hamiltonians of certain quantum systems that are difficult to simulate with a classical computer.
Could you maybe explain what boson sampling is, if it's doable in a few tens of seconds? It's not too long.
So boson sampling, it's essentially a task that, so when you send indistinguishable photons into a complex linear system, at the output, you measure the coincidence. So let's suppose you send 3 photons through the linear optical system, and you measure essentially the coincidence between all the modes, the threefold coincidence at the output. Then this will give you a distribution of probability. So distribution, you will say, okay, between these 3 modes, I get with a certain probability, I measure 3 photons. In these 3 modes, I have another probability. And essentially, by doing this experiment, you can show that the photons are effectively sampling a distribution of what is called a permanence. It's like a determinant, but it's a permanent that is calculated from the matrix that is describing this linear system. And you can show that by doing this experiment with photons, you can sample the distribution of permanence more efficiently than by using a computer. Another way of turning the problem around is that when you have a big matrix that is very complex, in this matrix, you take some submatrices and you try to calculate the determinant of this the permanent, so it's kind of a determinant of these submatrices. When these submatrices are too big, your computer cannot calculate that. So this, and what the boson sampling does, it doesn't exactly calculate the permanence, but it can sample the distribution of permanence of all the submatrix of your matrix in a more efficient way than a classical computer. I don't know if that was very clear.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, thank you.
So I think the point that I wanted to make here is that it's important to understand that it's a non-deterministic problem. So it's completely unuseful in practice. the boson sampling, so sending photons into a linear circuit, does not calculate the permanent of a matrix. It sample a distribution of permanence, which is difficult to do with a classical computer, but also completely unuseful in real life. So it's a problem that has no interest, but it's difficult to track with a classical computer. Okay, I'm not sure if I was clear, but anyway. But something that's probably more interesting is that using these linear circuits is probably more useful when you want to effectively simulate some quantum system. Because there are some systems, for example, in chemistry, that you have certain Hamiltonians that describe some quantum system, and to describe the evolution of this Hamiltonian, you could effectively do the simulation optically by injecting some quantum states into a programmable linear optical network and measure what you get at the output. So that's another another interesting use of this linear programmable optical circuits. And the three criteria that are very important when you want to perform an information processing or a computing task with these linear circuits is, of course, the number of photons that you're going to use, which is necessarily linked to the source that you are going to use in this case, but also the complexity of the circuit, typically the number of modes that you can interconnect, and also its ability to be reprogrammable. Because essentially, for example, you want to be able to reprogram entirely the matrix that is describing this linear optical system. Ideally, you would like to have the biggest circuit as possible with the maximum number of modes at the input and the output, and to be able to reprogram all the coefficients of the matrix, of the operator that perform the matrix that perform the transformation. And in our work, what we have achieved, that we have at least tried to do, is to use a multimode fiber as a platform to program some arbitrary complex linear optical network to implement quantum optics experiments. And we have done that by using light shaping technique in order to reprogram the operation performed by the multimode fiber. So using a multimode fiber instead of a photonic circuit in this case will give us many advantages, including the complexity, because we're going to have many modes, we're going to have access to many modes, and thanks to light shaping technique, we're going to have also the programmability. So I will go more into details right now about that. So to achieve the programmability, to reprogram a multimode fiber into a certain linear optical network, this has been done actually with classical light. And the technique to do that, again, use a transmission matrix-based wavefront shaping technique. So the first step of the process, we need to measure the transmission matrix of the multimode fiber. In this case, please note that we are measuring the transmission matrix between both polarization at the input and many modes at the output. So we have two SLM. Each of the SLM is actually shaping a different polarization at the input of the multimode fiber. And we measure like that classically the transmission matrix of our system. Then in the second step, instead of just using the inverse of the transmission matrix to refocus the light through the fiber, as we did before, in this case, we use the knowledge of the transmission matrix to effectively program a submatrices that essentially in this case is a 2 times M matrix. 2 being actually the 2 input modes of your system that in this case are each polarization of the input of the multimode fiber, which means that you can only program in this situation 2 modes at the input. That's what we did in our experiment. I mean, in other experiments with classical light, it has been done with more modes at the input. But in this case, we're going to program only matrices that are 2 times M. And M is essentially the number of pixels that you choose at the output, but you can arbitrarily choose them. It depends on essentially how many modes you add when you measure the transmission matrix. And by using the transmission matrix, we can effectively program, let's say, approximatively well. That means that it's not perfect. You never program perfectly the matrix, but you can effectively try to match as best as possible a given linear optical operator. And so the first thing we did with this system, we wanted to implement one of the most simple quantum optics experiment that you can do with a linear optical system. And this experiment is a Hongo-Mandel experiment. In the Hongo-Mandel experiment, I'm going to remind you what is a Hongo-Mandel experiment. You have a source of photon pairs at the input. And you generate photon pairs again by illuminating a nonlinear crystal with a blue pump laser. And you produce photon pairs at the output in the red that are effectively indistinguishable. You separate them with a polarization beam splitter, and you inject them in each of them into a single mode fiber. Note that the difference with the previous setup is that in this case, each photon is rarely into a single spatial mode. Then in a Hongu model experiment, you send both photons into different input ports of a beam splitter, and you measure coincidence between the two output ports. When you do that and you change the relative path delay between the two photons at the input, you observe that when the delay are exactly the same, there is essentially a dip in the coincidence rate that you measure at the output. And this dip here corresponds exactly to a destructive quantum interference phenomena. And this actually destructive quantum interference is precisely linked to the shape, to the form of the matrix that is describing the beam splitter. So this is a very, probably one of the most simple experiments that you can do with photon pairs and with a linear optical circuit, with actually the most simple linear optical circuit that you can have, that is a beam splitter. So the first thing we did, we tried to reproduce this experiment by replacing the beam splitter by a spatial light modulator and the multimode fiber. And at the output, we were detecting light only in two output modes. So we just positioned actually two photodetectors at the output and measure the coincidence between them. And by using the transmission, after measuring the transmission matrix, we were able to essentially reprogram the spatial light modulator at the input to program an arbitrary 2x2 matrix that has this form here. Here you can see that because we have some losses in our system, we have actually more degrees of freedom, and we can also program the phase of this anti-diagonal coefficient of this beam splitter matrix. By doing this experiment, if you look at what you have at the output by replacing the detector by a camera, you see that essentially the light is focused onto the two modes where the fibers are. And if you use the photodetector to perform coincidence and scan the relative delay, so you essentially perform a Hongu model experiment, you observe that if you set alpha and beta equal to 0, then you come back to a conventional beam splitter matrix, and you see that in this case, you have the red curve that is here. You observe a dip as expected, a dip in the coincidence that is exactly the same than a Hongu model experiment. So we effectively reproduce a Hongu model experiment by replacing the beam splitter by like light shaping, a spatial light modulator, and a multimode fiber. But here we have a bit more degrees of freedom because the matrix that we effectively implement is a lossy matrix, which means that we have access to alpha and beta. And if we program alpha minus beta equal to pi, we can also change actually the quantum destructive interference into a constructive interference, and in this case, observe a bunching between the photon pairs. Again, these parameters alpha and beta are entirely calculated from the knowledge of the transmission matrix. So we just need to program the right mask on the SLM in order to change the anti-bunching into bunching in this case. And again, we can do it also by changing the relative phase and observe some other effect. But essentially, that we did here, we achieve Hongu model experiment with a lossy and controllable beam splitter by using light shaping in a multimode fiber, which was really one of the first work we did to demonstrate the ability, this reprogrammable ability of the multimode fiber. Later, we did another experiment where we simulated something a bit more complex. We simulated an experiment that is investigating two-photon coherent absorption. So we don't.
Can I ask a question on the previous slide?
Yes.
I thought this link between alpha and beta was imposed by energy conservation in the beam splitter. So when you do alpha minus beta equals pi, do you kind of add energy or some?
Yes. So yeah, sorry, I was not clear about that. So that's what I mean when I said the beam splitter is lossy. So you see there is a little epsilon here, which means that essentially my system is not constrained. So what is happening in the system, we only pick up two modes at the output, but actually the majority of the light is going into all the other modes at the output of the multimode fiber, which means that the system that you effectively construct does not conserve the energy that you have at the input. It's a lossy beam splitter. And when you have a lossy beam splitter, you effectively have some freedom to manipulate the phase of the coefficient. You are right that if the beam splitter is not lossy, because of energy conservation, you need the phase of this element here are constrained.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah. So just another example of the use of our technique, but just in a more complex situation where we simulated an experiment doing investigating two-photon coherent absorption. The experiment of two-photon coherent absorption looks typically like that. Again, it's a complex setup made of different beam splitter, and to go small, we don't need really to go into the details of what is two-photon coherent absorption, but I just want to describe it very quickly here. We have a source of photon pairs. We send the photon pairs to a beam splitter in order to produce a noon state at the output. And then we send this noon state through a lossy beam splitter. And this lossy beam splitter is a beam splitter that has a linear loss or linear absorption of 50%. And what is interesting is that even if you have a linear absorption of 50%, you can show that by changing the relative phase between the two inputs here of this lossy beam splitter, you can achieve perfect absorption of the two photon states. And these beam splitter and 4 detectors at the output are essentially here to measure the probability of two photons to be transmitted through the lossy beam splitter. This experiment has been done, of course, with bulk optics, with metamaterials, with epsilon near zero materials, so it's not at all something new. And the typical curve that is plotted in this experiment is this curve when you see the probability, the survival probability of the two photons after the lossy beam splitter in function of the relative phase at the input. Okay, and you see that effectively for certain phases, you can achieve perfect absorption of the two photon state through the lossy beam splitter. Again, this is not a new experiment, it's that it has been done many times in the past. And what we tried to do in our experiment, we wanted to essentially reproduce this experiment, but by replacing this complex network here composed of many beam splitter by just our specialized modulator and multimode fiber. And in this case, we use 4 detectors positioned in 4 different modes at the output of the multimode fiber. If I go back here a little bit, you can see that this linear optical system can be decomposed into the multiplication of 3 matrices with 2 phases that has to be controllable. The phase is here alpha that is linked to the lossy beam splitter here, and the phase phi here that is linked to the input. With our system, we can exactly program the same matrix, so the matrix that results from the multiplication of these 3 matrices, and having still the control of all the phase independently alpha and phi. When we do that, we effectively reproduce exactly this experiment, and we can effectively simulate the exact same curve that had been obtained, for example, in this experiment with metamaterial, of the two photon survival probability in function of the phase at the input here. And by doing that, we effectively demonstrated that it's possible to implement this whole linear optics experiment into a multimode fiber using light shaping. So just to conclude the second part of the work, I have shown you that we can use here light shaping technique in order to implement linear network into a multimode fiber and sort of creating a small quantum lab or small photonic chip into a multimode fiber for quantum experiments. We have demonstrated the programmation of simple linear optical circuits using photon pairs. And I think the most interesting part was the fact that we were already using a transmission matrix-based circuit matrix technique to program the circuits inside the multimode fiber. Yeah. So as just to mention about these 2 different works, I wanted to say that, as you can see, we use essentially the same wavefront shaping technique on one case to overcome the problem of scattering in terms of for quantum communication purpose, and in the second case, more to reprogram the fiber. We exploited the disorder to program some specific optical task inside the multimode fiber. So before to go into the last part of my presentation, I would like to ask Sylvain, how much time do I have left?
I think maybe, how about 10 minutes? Would that
10 minutes.
Okay. Enough? On the other hand, we're quite interested by this last part on quantum imaging, so I also don't want to limit you.
Okay, no, but just... Okay.
Also, we keep interrupting you, so it's...
that's fine. That's no, but 10 minutes. 10 minutes will be. Will be
let's say 15 at most would be ideal. Yeah.
Okay, 10 minutes. Okay. No, that's fine. I mean, I think
10 to 15.
Okay. So in the last part of the presentation, again, it will be slightly disconnected from the two first parts. In this last part, I really want to show you how we can adapt adaptive optics and wavefront shaping technique into quantum imaging scheme. And in particular, can we do that to, for example, do quantum imaging through scattering, and what's the interest of doing that? Just to start this last part, I need to briefly introduce what is quantum imaging. So quantum imaging essentially exploits the quantum properties of light in order either to improve already existing imaging setup, typically by improving the imaging quality, such as improving the spatial resolution in certain microscopy setup, or improving the subshot or improving the noise, the signal-to-noise ratio in imaging process. So that's one part of quantum imaging. And the second part of quantum imaging is to develop new imaging modalities that were not possible to achieve with classical light, so that are really based on the quantum properties of light. It was the case, for example, in ghost imaging, at least at the beginning. Then after, it was clear that ghost imaging was also able to be implemented with classical light. And also more recently, another example is the example of induced coherence imaging, or also named as imaging with undetected photons. So these are the two main aspects of quantum imaging. But there is something very important to remember, is that today, most quantum imaging experiments are still at a proof of principle stage. There is almost no practical application, and there is nearly no quantum imaging technique that can be used, for example, in microscopy or for biological imaging. But if at some point we want to move this laboratory proof of principle experiment towards practical application, we will need to deal with some problem that also exists in classical imaging, such as the presence of optical aberration and or scattering. So for that, we will need to adapt the technique that have been used in classical imaging, such as adaptive optics, wavefront shaping, into quantum imaging. And in this research axis, this part of my work, what we are trying to do, we are trying to adapt these techniques into the case of quantum imaging scheme that uses entangled photons, which is only a very specific type of quantum imaging scheme. Some quantum imaging scheme use squeeze light, single photon emitters, and in our case, we only focus on the scheme that are using photon pairs illumination. So in this last part, I will show you the progress that we have made in order to adapt this light control technique into a photon pair-based quantum imaging scheme. But before to start, I need first to clarify a little bit what I mean by imaging with photon pairs. When we constructed a setup to image with photon pairs, the setup is essentially can be depicted like that. You have on one side, you have the source. That is a source of photon pairs. So the photon pairs are produced using a thin nonlinear crystal illuminated by a blue pump laser. And conventionally, by a spontaneous parametric down conversion process, you have sometimes two photons in the ray that are emitted. These photons are entangled in space, which means that in practice, they are correlated in position and anti-correlated in the momentum. This is the source, one side of the setup. On the other part of the setup, you have typically a camera, a very sensitive camera, a single photon sensitive camera that is going to measure the photons at the output. And between the two, it's not the case here, you put an object, and then depending on what you want to do, you perform the experiment and you want to image some properties of this object or this object. Just for the clarity of this first, of this introduction, I didn't put any object. So I'm going to just do the experiment without any object and show you what we perform, what type of measurement we perform with the camera at the output. In this experiment, we use very sensitive camera, so typically the NCCD camera. And if you do a conventional measurement, you can just take an intensity image at the output. In this specific configuration that I have shown you here, we are effectively measuring the far field of the crystal, which means that you're going to observe this very conventional ring structure of the photon pairs. That is typically what you observe at the output of when you have type 1 generation process like that. Okay, so this intensity image, it's interesting, but it does not tell you anything about the collective behavior of the photon. It doesn't tell you when I measure a photon at this pixel, what's the probability of measuring the photon at the other pixel? So essentially, this is not more interesting than doing an experiment with a classical light that has the shape of a ring. To really benefit from the use of photon pairs, we need to be able to measure the correlation between photons. And to do that, we have developed some computational imaging technique that enable to not only measure the intensity, but also measure the joint probability distribution in space between the photon pairs. I will just give you an example of how we can do that. So the process is, in the process, we first select one pixel in the intensity image that we're gonna call the reference pixel. And we perform an acquisition of a lot of images. And in each of these images, we multiply the value at the pixel that we selected by the value of all the other pixels. Then we subtract from this first image that we construct here, we subtract another image that is resulting from the multiplication of the value of this pixel by all the values of the pixel in the next image. So essentially, we perform correlation within the same image, and we subtract them by the correlation between successive frames. If you do that and you accumulate images and images and images, essentially the images are very similar. So at the beginning, you see nothing. But the more you accumulate the images, then you start seeing here a small point here, exactly located at the symmetric position relative to the reference pixel that you have selected at the beginning. And in fact, what you are actually reconstructing here is exactly the conditional probability of measuring the second photon of the pair when the first photon has been detected at the reference pixel here. And this is really the information about the collective behavior of your photons, which in this case, due to momentum conservation in the generation process, are effectively anti-correlated on the camera. And so in fact, when you do the measurement and you perform the acquisition with many frames, what you retrieve at the output is not only one conditional images, but is as many conditional images as the number of pixels of your sensor, which is a huge amount of information. So effectively, the image that you measure at the output of when you do imaging with photon pairs is not a simple 2D intensity image. It's a very complex 4-dimensional joint probability distribution. And then in photon pair-based imaging experiment, we use the information contained in this joint probability distribution to achieve some imaging task. And we did use it in many of our works. Skip that. We did use it in many of our works, for example, to perform some experiment where we separated classical and quantum images. We also did it recently for object detection and ring. So again, measuring the joint probability at the output. And we also did it recently in an experiment when we did quantum holography. So here, essentially, the message for you is the fact that in a photon pair-based experiment, we do not measure an intensity image, we measure a joint probability distribution at the output. And it's the information of this joint probability distribution that we use to construct the image. But as you can imagine then, what is interesting here, even in this very simple proof of principle experiment, we were already experiencing some problem of aberration. For example, in the case of the quantum holography case, we had at the beginning some aberration in our system that were actually originating from the crystal that were generating the photons. And at first, we didn't really know how to compensate for them. Why is that? Because since we are measuring everything in our image are only measured through this joint probability distribution measurement and not the conventional intensity, we didn't know really how to apply either adaptive optics or wavefront shaping to compensate for this aberration. And so at the end, we managed to actually compensate for this aberration, but this raised the question of, okay, how can we adapt the adaptive optics and wavefront shaping techniques so they can be used in photon pair-based imaging scheme, and in particular, so they can compensate the aberration that are experienced by the joint probability distribution that we measure at the output. So in a sense, how can we use light shaping to shape photon pair correlations? So we started investigating this problem, and the easiest way of doing that was at the beginning really to, okay, how actually SLM acts on a source of photon pairs. When you generate photon pairs, entangled in space, and you put an SLM in your system, so it's exactly the same system than before, except that in this case, I am imaging the crystal onto the SLM, and then Fourier imaging the SLM onto the MCCD. I don't put any phase on the SLM. I look at the intensity at the output. So here I don't have anymore the ring, but it's exactly the same than a ring, just the ring that has been collapsed into a disk. So we have the disk. If I do the measurement, the joint probability distribution measurement, and I, for example, extract 3 conditional images, I again observe this anti-correlation behavior. So nothing has really changed since the first experiment. What I want to know is I want to know how the SLM can actually act on either the intensity or the joint probability distribution. So let's program a very simple phase pattern onto the spatial light modulator. When we do that, a very phase grating, it's interesting that we do not observe almost no changes in the intensity at the output. Essentially, the lights in the intensity behave exactly as spatially incoherent light. But now, if you look in the joint probability distribution, we observe that we effectively modify the probability of detecting one photon relative to each other. So we effectively shape the joint probability distribution of the photon pairs, but not without shaping too much their marginal probability, which is given by the intensity at the output. Oh, so this is interesting because then it's another, you can see here that shaping, in this case, shaping quantum light photon pairs in this case is a bit different than shaping classical light, in a sense that we only observe the effect of shaping when we measure the joint probability distribution of the output and not when we measure the intensity. So, which is very nice for us because that's exactly what we are using when we do the imaging. So since we know we can effectively shape the joint probability distribution, we can also probably compensate if there are some aberration in the joint probability distribution. So let's do that. Let's add a diffuser in our system now. So we have a diffuser and we keep the SLM flat at the beginning. When we put a very thin diffuser, we still have a lot of intensity at the output and the same shape, it's pretty homogeneous. But now when we measure the joint probability distribution, essentially we see nothing. So we see nothing not because there is nothing in this. We should be able to see speckle pattern in this, but the technique that measures the joint probability distribution is not good enough to retrieve this complex speckle structure. Essentially, the signal-to-noise ratio is not good enough in our technique, and it will require us to acquire to perform much longer acquisition to see something in this matrix. So in practice, it's a bit annoying because it means that we know we can use the SLM to compensate for the aberration in the diffuser, but we cannot do it in practice because we don't have enough good instrument to retrieve to see this aberration in the joint probability distribution. Well, to overcome this issue, we essentially play a little trick. We replace the pump laser at the input by a classical laser. And we did the optimization. We essentially compensate for the presence of the diffuser using the spatial light modulator, using the classical light. And after doing this compensation with the classical light, we kept the same SLM pattern and use it with the photon pairs. When we did that, we observe again no change in the intensity, but we were able to retrieve the correlation in the joint probability distribution of the output. Again, here we see that we have the correlation in certain conditional images, but not in all of them, which means that we do not really, this classical technique is not really ideal because we don't really refocus and correct the aberration in all the joint probability distribution. Recently, we improved a little bit this technique because it's not very easy to actually, it's not very convenient to switch from classical to quantum to perform this aberration correction technique. What we did recently, we kept actually the two beams superimposed with each other. So in the experiment, we now have all the time the laser and the photon pairs detected by the camera. And you can see that very well in the intensity here. You see this very complex speckle pattern that is superimposed on top of this homogeneous structure that is the photon pairs. When we perform the classical optimization using the classical light, again, it's fast and efficient. We can refocus the light here. And in parallel of doing that, we can keep acquiring images to retrieve the joint probability distribution. And by doing that, we demonstrate that we can effectively retrieve the correlation between photons through the diffuser. So beyond the fact that we effectively demonstrated that we can retrieve the correlation through the diffuser, which of course it's very important if we want in the future to perform some imaging task in the presence of aberration scattering. What I really like in this work is the fact that we used a very interesting approach that is based on a hybrid quantum classical source of light. Indeed, we were able to use the classical light laser to implement the optimization process to compensate in real time for the aberration, while in the same time we were still performing the acquisition to retrieve the joint probability distribution. And the reason why we can do that is because when we measure the joint probability distribution, it is not affected by the presence of classical light, because the classical light, the photons in the classical light are not correlated, which means that you can have any type of classical light on your sensor. When you measure the joint probability distribution, you do not see it. And this, in fact, was demonstrated in this very small experiment, where here we have in the intensity the superposition of two objects, a vertical, like a sitting cat that was illuminated by classical light and a sleeping cat that was illuminated with the photon pairs. And when we were measuring only the joint probability distribution, we were able to retrieve only the sleeping cat without the vertical cat, because the photons from the classical light were not correlated and then not registered when measuring the GPT, the joint probability distribution. And so these are the latest like essentially progress we made towards essentially adapting this light shaping technique for doing quantum imaging, and in particular quantum imaging through scattering media. Just to conclude this last part, so I've shown you that we can essentially adapt the technique of adaptive optics and wavefront shaping in order to retrieve, at least to measure correlation through a diffuser. And we have demonstrated in particular imaging correlation. We also demonstrated that we can retrieve actually entanglement through a diffuser in this case. But I think the most interesting part is that the fact that we implemented this hybrid approach, that instead of using only photon pairs or only classical light or switching between the two, we use both the classical light and the photon pairs illumination together. The classical light is not used in the imaging process. It's only used to perform the adaptive optics loop, fast and in real time, while in the same time, in the background, you keep acquiring the image with the camera in order to retrieve the joint probability distribution and then perform the quantum imaging task. Of course, here we haven't done yet experiment with an object, but we would like, of course, to do that very soon and use this approach in more realistic situation to try really to move this scheme, this quantum imaging scheme based on photon pair toward more practical application. So, I don't know if it was 10 minutes, but probably a bit more, but I would like to conclude this presentation so here I've shown you essentially three examples of application where we use light shaping technique and quantum optics. I hope that I have convinced you that these techniques, this combination of these very two fields that are apparently very disconnected, are useful to improving or developing quantum optical technologies. And I would like finally to thank all the people who were involved in this work that I've presented to you today. I also just give you a couple of the references that I mentioned in this presentation. And I would like to thank you all very much for listening to me this morning. I apologize for being a bit too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugo. Don't apologize. That was extremely interesting, and we did interrupt you. So that's completely okay. Maybe let's give us 5 minutes for questions so that everyone can go for lunch at 12:30. So the session is open for questions. Feel free to ask them in French as well. Vous pouvez prendre la parole directement, si vous voulez. Bon, je vais commencer traditionnellement par la première question pour lancer la discussion. Alors, peut-être un mot, tu nous as montré rapidement cette manip de image separation technique à la fin, avec un chat vivant et un chat mort. Je me demandais si tu voyais des applications pratiques de ça. Je sais pas, j'ai pas réfléchi, mais est-ce qu'on pourrait cacher un message quantique dans un flux de lumière classique ou autre? Je sais pas, est-ce que vous avez pensé à des applications pratiques?
Alors, donc l'application qui est donc en fait, cette approche qu'on fait ici, c'est un concept qui a été établi il y a quelques années, qui est le concept de quantum illumination. Et en fait, la plupart du temps, quantum illumination, c'est utilisé pour effectivement éliminer du bruit classique. C'est-à-dire que si tu fais un système d'imagerie dans lequel tu mesures des corrélations, effectivement, ça va te permettre d'éliminer tout type de background, de classical background light, ou même d'autres bruits classiques qui viennent autour. Et ça, c'est particulièrement intéressant. En tout cas, la première approche qui a été envisagée là-dedans, c'est pour les systèmes de type LIDAR.
Ouais.
Et effectivement, parce que ça permettrait, dans le LiDAR, il y a parfois des problèmes de lumière ambiante, ou même de gens qui veulent venir spoofer ton LiDAR. Et dans ce cas-là, ça te permet finalement de récupérer uniquement une image de l'objet que tu as effectivement sondé avec ta lumière, avec tes paires de photons. Donc finalement, c'est une approche qui permet de protéger le signal que tu as voulu mesurer de tous les signaux classiques qui peuvent être envoyés dessus. Donc typiquement, ça peut être utile en LIDAR. Et donc ça, c'est vraiment une première approche. Une approche un peu, disons, amélioration, élimination des bruits extérieurs et peut-être un peu amélioration de la sécurité, même si ce n'est pas du tout une sécurité qui est absolue, puisqu'on mesure juste des corrélations. Si quelqu'un arrive et nous envoie aussi des corrélations sur la caméra, on va aussi rien voir. Donc ça, c'est une première chose, mais je pense que la chose la plus importante que moi j'envisage le plus à ce niveau-là, c'est vraiment l'idée d'utiliser ces sources duales qui sont composées à la fois du classique et du quantique. Ça nous permet d'avoir en fait le meilleur des deux, puisqu'on peut utiliser en même temps avec la même caméra, en mesurant les intensités, on va avoir les informations de l'imagerie classique avec la source classique, et en mesurant la probabilité jointe, on va avoir finalement les informations des paires de photons. Et par exemple, on est en train d'essayer de faire un système dans lequel on fait de l'holographie en même temps avec une source classique et une source quantique. Et on peut voir, en fait, en utilisant ces deux informations, ça peut nous donner certains avantages en fait, dans la reconstruction holographique que l'on fait. Donc je pense que voilà, ça c'est un peu les deux approches qu'il y a. La première approche, c'est vraiment éliminer les bruits extérieurs pour améliorer la sécurité du système d'imagerie. Ça, c'est l'approche qui a été principalement utilisée par beaucoup de monde. Et la deuxième, que moi je pense qui est peut-être plus intéressante, c'est effectivement la possibilité d'utiliser ces deux canaux, c'est-à-dire à la fois le classique et le quantique, en même temps avec une seule caméra.
Il faudra que tu reviennes nous faire un séminaire sur l'holographie quantique.
Ouais.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Ouais, pour la rivière, là je vais essayer de rebondir un petit peu, puisqu'on a parlé LIDAR, donc ça me concerne un petit peu. J'avais juste une question sur ce que tu es en train de présenter là, sur le concept et la manip. Est-ce que quelles sont on va dire les portées de ce type de techno? C'est-à-dire, est-ce que c'est du laboratoire, c'est déjà sorti à l'extérieur, les manips sur combien de kilomètres? Voilà, c'est un peu ça, moi, mes grandes questions aujourd'hui, en termes d'application. D'accord.
Et d'une manière générale, sur les travaux que j'ai présentés ou sur un travail spécifique?
Sur l'écran, enfin, le slide que tu partages, par exemple, actuellement à l'écran, et puis sur tes travaux à toi, et puis la vision globale par rapport à ce qui se fait aussi de par ailleurs.
Alors, donc, d'une manière générale, les travaux que j'ai présentés là, tous les travaux que j'ai présentés aujourd'hui, ce sont des expériences qui se font en laboratoire, qui n'ont jamais vraiment eu d'application, enfin qui n'ont pas encore eu en tout cas d'application ni sur des grandes distances, ni vraiment pratique. Vous m'entendez toujours là? Parce que j'ai l'impression d'avoir perdu le son.
Oui.
On t'entend très bien. Hein.
Très bien, ok, parfait. Et donc oui, c'est vraiment des expériences encore en laboratoire. En fait, pour développer des applications vraiment pratiques, on est encore dans ces systèmes quantiques d'une manière générale, là, je parle surtout pour l'imagerie quantique, on est encore très limité par la puissance des sources, parce qu'en fait, les sources de paires de photons qu'on utilise, elles sont de très faible intensité. On est limité par les détecteurs, parce que même si les caméras, elles me permettent de reconstruire ces probabilités jointes, en fait, il faut des heures pour reconstruire une probabilité jointe. Alors, on a des technologies qui sont bien meilleures maintenant. On a récemment utilisé des caméras, des SPAD, qui permettent d'aller beaucoup plus vite pour reconstruire ces systèmes. Mais d'un point de vue technologique, on est encore en tout cas, à mon avis, on est pour le moment encore trop limité pour vraiment essayer de développer des applications vraiment pratiques avec ces systèmes-là. Il faut vraiment faire un gros effort technologique au niveau de la détection et des sources si on veut avoir quelque chose qui peut fonctionner. Si on veut faire un lidar avec des paires de photons, il vaut mieux avoir une source bien puissante et un détecteur assez efficace. Et donc voilà l'état des choses actuelles.
Okay. Ouais, je m'en doutais un petit peu, mais j'étais provocateur en parlant de kilomètres. Hein, ok, merci.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions ou remarques? Non?
Oui, Patrick Georges.
Ah oui.
J'avais une question sur justement les détecteurs. Les développements, c'est à quel niveau qu'il faudrait les faire pour améliorer En fait, c'est quoi les limitations liées aux détecteurs? À la fois les matrices, enfin, surtout les matrices et le MCCD.
Oui. Alors, idéalement, ce qu'on voudrait, c'est des détecteurs qui donc évidemment, détectent les photons à tous les coups, le font extrêmement rapidement avec un temps d'exposition extrêmement faible, pour qu'en fait, on puisse vraiment... bon, évidemment, si la source est trop faible intensive, ça ne sert à rien d'aller trop vite, mais si on suppose qu'on a une source aussi intense qu'on veut, donc on voudrait pouvoir détecter des paires aussi vite que l'on veut, donc très faible temps d'exposition, et évidemment, donc, ça nous donne des frame rates extrêmement rapides et avoir énormément d'images en très peu de secondes. Les technologies actuelles qui sont utilisées, donc maintenant, ça c'est le cas idéal, mais dans les technologies actuelles qu'on a, qui marchent pas mal, donc les EMCCD, c'est une première technologie. Elle a le gros avantage, c'est d'avoir une efficacité quantique qui sont très bonnes. C'est typiquement de l'ordre de 80% à 800 nanomètres. Le problème, c'est qu'elles sont très lentes. Elles ont des frame rates qui font de l'ordre de 100 images par seconde. Donc, encore une fois, si on veut faire une approche où on veut mesurer pair by pair le stem, ça va nous prendre trop de temps. Et le troisième point que je n'ai pas mentionné au début, c'est qu'évidemment, le problème de bruit. Donc, il faut que nos détecteurs soient sans aucun bruit. Parce qu'à chaque fois qu'il y a un bruit, c'est comme si on avait détecté un photon qui n'existe pas. Donc, ça complexifie encore le process de mesure. Donc, les caméras MCC ont du bruit. Elles sont lentes, elles ont un peu de bruit, mais elles ont une bonne efficacité quantique. Et pour le moment, c'est Joint Probability Distribution en quelques heures. Une autre technologie qui a été récemment développée, ce sont les caméras. Elles ont un grand développement d'efficacité et elles ont des résolutions assez faibles, 32 par 32 par pixels. C'est pas grand-chose par rapport avec les... En revanche, elles vont extrêmement rapidement et elles peuvent faire des temps d'intégration qui sont de l'ordre de la nanoseconde. On peut avoir des frame rates de l'ordre de 10 kg, de 100 000 frames par seconde, ce qui est pour nous est énorme et qui nous permet vraiment de reconstruire ces matrices beaucoup plus rapidement. C'est Joint Probability Distribution beaucoup plus rapidement. On a démontré récemment qu'on pouvait utiliser les SPAD pour mesurer ces probabilités jointes en quelques minutes, par exemple. Mais les technologies sont encore pas assez développées pour avoir vraiment des systèmes avec beaucoup de pixels, avec un très bon fill factor. Donc, il y a encore des progrès à faire de ce côté-là. Mais disons que les SPAD caméras ont plus de potentiel que les EMCCD parce que les EMCCD, leur technologie pour mesurer les photons uniques, c'est d'utiliser un process de multiplication qui va inévitablement ralentir la mesure de frame rate. Alors que les SPAD caméras, comme elles ont un procédé d'avalanche qui se fait en parallèle sur chacun des pixels, elles n'ont pas cette limitation et donc elles ont vraiment un fort potentiel pour faire ces mesures en imagerie quantique.
Et qu'est-ce qui drive ces développements? Il y a d'autres applications avec un marché plus développé pour faire ça?
Oui, alors les SPAD, les EMCCD, je ne sais pas trop. Je suppose que les EMCCD, c'est quand même très utilisé pour détecter des signaux. C'est très sensible, donc ça doit être détecté utilisé pour détecter des signaux très faibles, peut-être. Mais je ne sais pas trop quoi les EMCCD sont utilisés. Par contre, les SPAD, c'est une technologie qui commence à être vraiment utilisée, qui est utilisée notamment dans les techniques de LiDAR, dans les techniques de non-line of sight imaging. Et ce qui est l'avantage, c'est que ce sont des toutes petites chips. Donc, ça peut vraiment être miniaturisé et potentiellement être mis dans un appareil photo, dans un téléphone portable, par exemple, pour servir de petit LiDAR dans un téléphone portable. Donc, les marchés pour les SPAD caméras sont vraiment en train de s'ouvrir. Les prix des chips commencent vraiment à diminuer. Et donc, il y a vraiment un appel sur ces marchés-là et l'imagerie quantique va sûrement pouvoir bénéficier du développement des SPAD caméras pour ces autres marchés et pouvoir avoir des meilleurs chips dans le futur.
Ok, merci.
Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a une question encore rapide et urgente pour Hugo? Et ben, sinon, je crois qu'on va s'arrêter là. Il est 12h36. Un grand merci, Hugo. C'était très pédagogique, très intéressant, très clair. Et puis, je pense qu'on aura l'occasion de rediscuter de tout ça dans le futur. Et en attendant, donc, je vous souhaite bon appétit à tous. Et puis, à très bientôt pour un prochain séminaire. Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Merci, au revoir.